Now, can we please give a huge bravado cheer to our final bravada of the evening, Donald Clark, who's going to come and talk about I Spy.
Thank you very much. So, my name's Donald. I'm obviously from Scotland, not this part of the world, but I have lived in Brighton for 38 years, so I think I'm a sort of qualified Brightonian by now. And Claire said in her talk earlier that sometimes life throws a spanner at you. And I'm going to talk about a spanner that was thrown at me and one night in 1993, okay? And I was sitting watching this program, and this was the old logo. Some of us will remember that old logo on the Panorama program. We were sitting on our sofa, and the dramatic music came on, and up came an image of this guy. And this guy was my best friend at university. I shared a room with him, 2 beds in one room for 2 years. We went drinking together, we went on holiday together. He was my best buddy. And there was a whole Panorama program about him, because it turns out he was a spy. He was a big-time spy. For 12 years, it was Stasi, actually controlled by the KGB, and I never knew. How shit am I? There's one of things in the world, as it were. And his name is Robin Pearson, and he was super smart. He came from Northern Ireland, from Belfast, and had a very strong accent like me, but he spoke flawless German. People thought he was German at 19. And he was doing fine art along that, super smart, sort of cookie, as it were. This is me on the left up there with my friend Robin, the spy. weird here. That was my girlfriend, who is now my wife. This is our 40th year married. And that's Robin down there as well. So I knew this guy super well. And this whole program came on about him, okay? And he had a handler, just like Marcus Wolf, the famous Carla handler. And if you know the Cambridge story, the Cambridge Five, they all went to Trinity College in Cambridge, Eton and so on, and they turned out to be pretty treacherous in terms of the secrets of this country, and they had a handler. And this is Bernard Carhouse, who was Robin's handler. And actually, after the wall came down, in 1989, spilled the beans and told us all about my friend Robin. And these are some of the things that he said. The Stasi, so he went to Leipzig, my friend, on a 1-year exchange thing, and they recruited him there. We were all really furiously left-wing at that age. People my age will remember that period way back in the 70s. Everybody was left-wing then, you know, who was at university certainly. And they paid him. Looking back now, we're all going, wow, that's interesting. They used to disappear a lot of weekends to countries in Europe. Nobody ever did that, you know. Nobody went for weekends in Paris when I was at college or university. And it turns out that they were paying him 500 Deutschmarks a month at Edinburgh University, because we had an amazing defence department, and loads of people in the defence department went to work in NATO, and his job was to recruit students. And in fact, for 12 years, he went through the whole academic system in England, recruiting academics and students into what was effectively the KGB through the Stasi. And this is old school. The Stasi were real old school spies. He had invisible ink. Invisible ink. He had a transmitter, a one-way radio transmitter, and they would give him pick-up points. I remember we went to Greece, you know those pictures of Greece? And we were in a little island called Spetses. And he had picked up Greek in just a few days, you know, he was an amazing linguist. But then he disappeared at the weekend, and looking back, he went to Athens and never told us why. It was to pick up his 500 Deutschmarks. He always had money, which none of us had in those days, of course. And of course, he also had a safe house in Edinburgh where other people could go up, as it were, when they were sent across to spy on the UK. And if you remember 1989, so he was recruited in 1977, the wall comes down. His last transmission was on the night before the wall came down. So he was full on for 12 years. The wall comes down in 1989, and in Leipzig, in German it would be Die Wende, which is the end, it's the end time, as it were. They smashed into the Stasi offices, and there were 180 kilometers of files. 180 kilometers. These guys were meticulous. And they started shredding them, of course, but all the shredders burnt out. And so eventually, the British found theirs because the shredders never quite reached the British files, but they were all codenamed. They didn't have Robin's name there, they had a code name, so they didn't know who he was. They had to backwardly engineer and say, oh, he was at Edinburgh University, and we backwardly tried to find out who it was, and eventually did find out. And there are whole teams of people for years now have been piecing together the pieces of shredded paper, some which are even now revealing people. In fact, so I ran a tech company in Brighton, started it, and had a lot of people, a lot of young people back in the day, and I had 4 kids from Berlin, one of who turned out also to be a spy. I don't know what it is about me. They actually, I know these 4 people really well. I don't know which one is a spy, but they didn't tell. MI6 interviewed them all, but they didn't tell which one was a spy. They all worked in the American embassy in East Berlin before the wall came down, and their names were found in shredded stuff that was pieced together again. So we're still unfolding what happened in those days. Now, to give you some idea how serious the Stasi took spying inside their own country, you know, Stalin had 1 in 6,000 people spying. The Gestapo had 1 in 2,000. The Stasi had 1 in 63. Okay, so how many people are in here? What, 400? There would probably be about 6 or 7 Stasi spies if you held this event in Leipzig. They were everywhere. There were people, there were husbands who were spying on wives and vice versa. It was extreme. Some say it was as low as 1 in 65 if you count just people who occasionally give little hints and tips. And then, after this panorama program, I'll come to a bit when they tried to recruit me into the KGB, but we were there. I didn't know about Robin Member. But I became slightly obsessed by this. It's sort of, you know, if you imagine your best friend, you discover it on television, you get a sort of weird sense of betrayal in a way, you know? Like, what, you know, he could have told me. Maybe not. He obviously thought, Donald, he'll tell everybody. So it's obviously not on the cards for him. But go to the Stasi Museum in Berlin and see how meticulous they were. They had cameras behind buttons on shirts. They had them in watches. They had them in ties. They had them on felt tip pens for teachers in classrooms. They had them on radios. They had them on cuckoo clocks, ornaments, bird boxes, inside petrol cans, inside dustbins, even in watering cans. There were cameras everywhere. You couldn't move in East Germany without being filmed or surveilled. Even electromagnetic things in the front of cars. It's just extraordinary. But what they were really good at was this. This was invented by the Stasi. And it's a little rod that they would drill a hole from one flat through into another flat and stop it just before the wallpaper, so that it gave you perfect sound and recording. And that was how they frequently spied on people. You never knew because you'd have to go through your whole house pressing every single bit of wallpaper to find the microbes. They also found training photographs of how to train a spy and dress up like a spy. Remember, this is the 1970s, guys. No, TK Maxx then. How they got away with it, I don't know. And this one, how to be an American tourist, was the caption in German underneath this one, which is an amazing thing in itself. The false noses, and then this is a really astonishing thing. You can see this in the museum in Leipzig, and on my tour of various sort of prisons over the years, I've seen this frequently. They would store your smell. They were so meticulous, they would sit you down, interrogate you in a hot room, make you sweat, take the piece of cloth and put it in a jar, and if you became a threat to the state or tried to run towards the wall, the dogs would be after you. They trained the dogs on the smell, and this is them training them in the smell. These jars, they were, if just after the wall came down, you could see this, and if you went to Germany and went to, you know, one of these sort of, fair type things, you could buy hundreds of thousands of these jars. There were thousands of them all over the place because so many people had their smell stored. And this was the sort of instruction manual to put the cloth on the chair as you were being interrogated. An interesting insight, if you're interested, is to go to Berlin, go to the DDR Museum. And I remember I went with my friend Ronnie from Scotland, from Paisley, and we sat down in an East German living room. Have you been in this museum? It's really interesting. Myself and Ronnie sat on the sofa here and went, oh, this is amazing, because I grew up in a council house in Scotland. To be honest, this was better. So we sat there going, this is very nice. We didn't have any books in my house at all. It was quite astonishing. You know, it's not all bad. And there are people who have a sort of nostalgia for this now, you know, because people were genuinely looked after, despite the horrific surveillance that went on. Because behind many of these houses, this sort of surveillance equipment sat there. Oh, sorry. Now, these are really interesting books if you're interested here. But something else happened. I used to go to the Soviet Union. I say I was really left-wing when I was younger. I went to the Soviet Union many times, travelled way down south, right across the Chinese border, all major cities and so on. And this is me in the Soviet Union. And in 1982, I was in Kiev, when in a bar. If any of you travelled in the Soviet Union, the bars were always underground and the hotels really dark. They sold cans of Heineken. That was the only beer you could ever get. And a guy said, do you like football? And I love football. And he said, Sparta Moscow are playing Dynamo Kiev tomorrow. Would you like to go? Great. The next morning, a black car turns up. Now, if you know anything about Soviet Russia, a black car is a big signal. Because only government people had black cars. And he took me to, this is the modern stadium actually, to the Dynamo Kiev stadium, and there were 50,000 people there. It was grim. And he was the only person in a suit, and at halftime, he took out a little pennant, one of those triangle pennant, and gave it to me. It was really weirdly formal. And then he made a pitch to try and recruit me into the KGB. Now remember, this is 1982. I didn't know that Robin was a spy. I didn't know that till 1993. But looking back now, of course they knew about me. I was Robin's best mate. He was the senior spy for the Stasi for 12 years in the UK. Of course they had to file on me. And I spoke a bit of Russian and blah, blah, blah. So they had targeted me. But I wasn't stupid enough to have said yes. My life might have been very different if I had just said yes at that moment and fallen for the sort of foolishness of youth. Anyway, I watched the football match and came back. My wife was in the hotel. I said, that was weird. They just tried to nobble me into the KGB. Anyway, so in my obsession, I went back to Leipzig, and this is a place called the Runde Ecke, the round corner. This is the Stasi headquarters. This is where Robin would have worked. It's also where Robin would have met Putin, because Putin worked out of here. Putin was in East Germany, in Dresden, but often in Leipzig. Leipzig was the more important place. So through that door, Putin and Robin would have walked, and they almost certainly knew each other. Now, another interesting thing to see when you travel around Europe, whenever you go to one of the local prisons that were originally Gestapo prisons, they were turned into KGB prisons. And the KGB, if anything, were worse. It's the one thing I learned on my tour of Europe. This guy is absolutely ruthless, as we know, and was ex-KGB, of course. A really interesting place, if you ever go to Berlin, I highly advise this, is a Hohenschönhausen prison. Now, when people were picked up in Berlin for betraying the state, they were bundled into the back of a baker's van, completely sealed, and they never knew where they were taken. They were taken to a prison, they didn't know where the location was, and they would spend their sentence not knowing where they were. Years later, they had to go back, and sometimes you could just feel the little grain under the table. It was the only way they would recognize the cell they were in. And the cruelty was enormous. This is the cell block if you go into it, and they have ex-prisoners who take you around. It's quite harrowing. Some of the cells are sealed up and so small that they would seal the door and fill it up with water to your neck. Imagine the claustrophobia, hypothermia. In some paddy cells, there's a very famous case of somebody who died and committed suicide in one of those cells. Paddy cell, couldn't hear anything, kept for months and months. All because he had criticised the state. The paddy cell detail. These are water cells, where they would flood you with water, a sort of modern version, a version of waterboarding, effectively. And don't think we're innocent in this either, because, of course, the Alistair Campbell, Blair, Bush coalition did exactly the same thing with Iraqis in other places, and it was sanctioned and legal by those people, which is unforgivable. If you go to Budapest, and this is probably the best of these terror museums, I don't know if you've been in this one, Budapest. absolutely fantastic inside because it shows you the horror of being imprisoned for something that you just said or thought. If you go to Vilnius in Lithuania, also, has anybody recognized this person here? They have a statue of Frank Zappa. For some reason, I have no idea why, next to the Stasi prison. But there he is, and the same thing happens here. These horrible prisons, padded cells. Remember, these were Gestapo cells that were turned into KGB cells. This is a little tray that's here. They would make you stand naked on this little tray and then fill it in with icy cold water up to your neck. This is in Tallinn in Estonia, and they make the very strong point that exactly the same thing happened by these two totalitarian regimes. Different ideologies, same methodology. Prison doors, the same is true in Riga. There, the Gulag was slightly more popular, one might say, and of course many, you must remember in those days, it wasn't just the fascists and Nazis who did this, many of the locals were involved in identifying Jewish people and sending them to their fate. I eventually, on my obsession, got up to Jura in the north of Scotland, to George Orwell's little house, which has no water, or actually it's water, no electricity, where he wrote 1984, a book that profoundly changed my life and changed my politics forever, away from the madness of youth and the madness that I had around extreme ideological left-wing politics in those days. Amazing place to go. So, another thing happened to me, which is in Berlin, where I used to go a lot, I used to work in Berlin. I met another guy who attended Eton. He went to Oxford, he spoke fluent Russian, he was the head of the Intelligence Committee and a Tory MP. He was the equal and opposite of me in terms of his social origins. And he became one of my best friends. And he knew everything about this stuff. He spoke fluent Russian, and he was the real deal. Even in his Wikipedia page, it said he was a spy. He was so obviously a spy over MI6. And I travelled all over Africa with him, and he would go here, there, and everywhere. And I have some really sad news because he died 2 weeks ago. Almost didn't give this talk because that's another thing. Anyway, it was quite interesting, this encounter, because he opened my eyes up to what was happening now. Now, I don't know if you've heard, it really worries me what's happening now. I spent my whole life studying this spy thing. I thought the Cold War had died, then Putin invades Ukraine, so we have Cold War 2.0. I don't think that's the big problem. The big problem is something else. Now, there's a reason why we actually have Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, which is Britain, New Zealand, Australia, the US, and Canada. Somebody said there's only one benefit from Brexit. Another one actually is in intelligence. There's a rule in intelligence: you don't tell anybody in France or Europe anything, or everybody knows. And we're laughing because we go, yeah, that's probably right. And this intelligence group actually predicted the invasion. You might remember that at the time, the UK and US knew it was going to happen. Macron, the night before, claimed it wasn't going to happen because he had spoken to Putin. He had spoken literally on the telephone to Putin, and Putin said, nothing happened. Next day they invade Ukraine. And that's because the British in particular are pretty good at this. We happen to have been doing it for a very, very long time. Quite low key, but quite well admired in the intelligence community. And I think Five Eyes is the right way to do this because the new target is not Putin and Russia. The new problem is China. And we are sleepwalking into catastrophe here. And the Chinese have already embedded 30 Confucius institutes hanging off the side of all our major universities. All our major universities are in hawked revenue from Chinese students. Many of them would collapse if that revenue disappeared. Many of these Chinese students work directly for the Chinese government, and they've been stealing IP and industrial secrets and science for years. Some countries, like Sweden, have banned the Confucius Institutes. We, I think, are about to, because the recent report, published just a week and a half ago, was damning. Absolutely damning. We had a completely inadequate response to this stuff. They were running riot in our university system. I teach in universities, and remember the Cambridge Five? It's an easy hit in a university. Security is shit. The IT systems are bad, and they have a political leaning which leans towards the left. It tends to be a liberal leaning environment. So it's a perfect target for these kids. And they go in there, and they are ruthless in terms of what they're doing. And this is happening right now. Some universities have funded the Confucian Institutes. They sit right in the belly of all our major universities. And that's what's got to stop. Because they are the new Gestapo. They are the new fascists. They are the new ideological Stasi. They will stop at nothing in terms of surveillance. They already have laws that prevent you thinking and saying anything against the state. If you use, and I work in the AI, by the way, sorry. If you use a large language model in China, and you try and criticize or ask a question about the Chinese government, what do you think comes back? A very glowing review, because everything is controlled there. The Great Firewall of China has had a superb effect on numbing the minds of young people in that country. Many of the students who are sent here are specially picked. They're very wealthy, and you'll notice if you teach Chinese students in the university, if anybody's an academic here, they keep to themselves. They don't mix much. But amongst them are people who are out to destroy what we have. And that is a big mistake. Thankfully, we've got onto it now. But just to round up, you know, I'm 66 years old. This happened to me by accident. A spanner was thrown at me. I happened to get to know a lot of spies. When I was in Berlin last year, there was a Chinese girl who came up and wanted my LinkedIn contact. And my friend, who was a Tory MP, said she's a spy. They are everywhere, and she was. I don't know if you remember Barry Gardner, the Labour MP, who took £500,000 from a woman called Catherine Ching, who in the Intelligence Committee is known as Ching Ching. They have invaded the Labour Party. Every party, not just the Labour Party. They're in there with money, with power, and with influence. And if there's one thing I've learned now is avoid all ideologies. I don't care who it is. I'm a big, big fan now of freedom of speech. And not letting any government control what I have to say on social media as well. And I may be atypical because I don't like people controlling AI. You know, I say, well, we're going to impose a set of values, human values. Whose values are you going to impose? The values of academics? I am one. I don't like the values of academics anywhere near my kids. Because it's a skewed, biased portion of the population. You know? Are you going to suddenly be biased against people who voted for Brexit? Because some of those were my relatives. I don't think you have a right to guardrail or put values on anybody. There is no single set of human values that we impose on this stuff. We must preserve humans. The freedom to commute, debate, discuss, freedom of speech, or we will see the rise of fascism or Chinese communism again. I'm sorry to end on such an impressive note. Jesus Christ, lighten up, man. But it's a serious business. And it's one thing that I learned the hard way by encountering this through my best friend and subsequent people who I worked with and got to know really, really well. So I'm sorry if this was a bit serious and pessimistic, but you can't have all the talks being good fun. These are great talks, seriously. But hopefully I've passed on another type of message here about a real thing that's happening in the world right now. I think it really matters. Thank you very much.